A continuación les presento a todo un referente internacional en métodos diagnósticos y opciones terapéuticas proveniente de Alemania, fundador de Armin, al cual dirige desde hace años y estudioso incansable con 3 carreras en su haber incluido. Su espíritu investigador lo ha llevado a formar parte de numerosas sociedades científicas, siempre por el espíritu de superación y proporcionar la mejor calidad de vida a los pacientes con enfermedad transmitida por garrapata. Hoy nos hablará de pruebas diagnósticas modernas para la enfermedad de Lyme crónica y coinfecciones. Con ustedes, el doctor Armin Schwarzbach.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the organization of ALCE here. It's, I think, my 6th time in Madrid, wonderful city. Tomorrow you will see the match of your soccer teams, and we like in Germany your soccer teams, Real and Atletico. Very good teams here. Thank you again for coming, inviting me here. I want to talk about modern diagnostic tests for chronic Lyme. It's chronic Lyme. We don't want to talk about testing for bullseye rashes. That's easy. We don't have a problem with it. We have big problems in testing chronic Lyme disease. This is a slide to show you about the sensitivity and the specificity for chronic Lyme again. And we have big problems with the ELISA. You heard today from a speaker from your university about that. But the sensitivity is a problem in chronic Lyme. Why? There's different reasons for that. We have a problem that the test systems are not adapted for chronic Lyme. The reference ranges are not adapted for chronic Lyme. They are just adapted for acute, for bullseye rashes. And there's a rule that laboratories should do an own reference range, but no laboratory is doing that. So we overtake the reference ranges from bullseye rashes for chronic Lyme. And you heard about the TH1, TH2 shift, which is really problematic. So we cannot overtake reference ranges so easily for chronic Lyme. That makes it very complicated. The sensitivity means the false negative, and we have the problem of the ELISA that it's just around 15, 20, 30% positive in chronic Lyme. The Western blot, which should be the more specific test, is also more sensitive, and you find around 40 up to 60% positive in chronic Lyme by Western blots. But what does a Western blot mean? Is it an active infection or not? You just can say, okay, there was a transmission of Borrelia burgdorferi into the body. You cannot say is an active infection or not. To mention the specificity, that was a wrong translation before with Carmen. The specificity is not the problem. If you find Borrelia antibodies, these are Borrelia antibodies. That's not the problem of the specificity. It's the problem of the sensitivity. This was the study from Michael J. Cook and Bazan Puri. The Professor Perron showed you in the first presentation about that a little. That was the second paper about standardization. This was the paper that you trust HRV ELISA. You believe in HRV ELISA. If you have suspicion for HRV, you do an AIDS test. And you can believe in that because sensitivity is 99.99999%. You never will reach in a test system 100%. That's impossible in no test system in the world. But in the Borrelia ELISA, it's 500-fold more negative statistically. So would you believe in a Borrelia ELISA or not? That's an important question, also for the scientists here. If you want to care for that, really important to look at the sensitivity in comparison with the HRV ELISA. HRV is a good ELISA. Hepatitis B is wonderful, hepatitis C. But the antigenicity of Borrelia burgdorferi is too complicated, also for test producers. A huge problem, and Professor Perron did wonderful work on that. Thank you for that. This is where we work now more and more standardization. That's a microarray. The microarray have the advantage that you have a linearity. The Western blot is a semi-quantitative method. It's a semi-quantification by visual impression. So some doctors say it's a borderline band or it's a weak positive band. The other says, no, it's positive. The bands are not easy to distinguish. Are they negative or positive or borderline? We name it a semi-quantification method. The new microarrays, instead, they can do that. They have a linearity, so they can do a quantification. This is not to irritate you. At the end, we have also an ELISA technique. ELISA means we use it very often also in other techniques. What you see here is a 96 well. We work in laboratories. We like to work with that. I worked for Synlab Group before, and these are big laboratories. They bought a lot of the Spanish market also and French market. And we know we need bigger laboratories with a big volume of laboratory results in it, because we need a cheaper production for them, because people are getting older and a lot of patients have infections and other things. So we need the 96 well. This is, I think, one of the future in laboratories, in standard laboratories. This was a paper where I worked on it. It shows impressively that these pleomorphic forms, or you named it L forms. L forms is not correct scientifically. We name it pleomorphic forms. This is the correct scientific expression. Some name it round bodies, some name it cyst. But these pleomorphic forms have double membrane, and they can survive the attacks of macrophages, and they survive intracellular macrophages by the SNIPS. Maybe you've heard about those models. I went 2 weeks ago to Denver, Colorado, where Horowitz was, and also some other experts talking about that. And also Professor Sang, Christian, we met there. It was very interesting. So the IDSA, they say we have persister forms. You heard about that. And what do they use now? Azlocillin. Azlocillin, this kills every pleomorphic cystic forms. Azlocillin is not available in Europe now, but maybe this could be an option in antibiotics. It's a penicillium, a derivative of penicillin. What I have found in this study with Professor Gilbert in 2 scientific papers, they are both PubMed listed, we found biofilms also in these cultures. This is an in vitro model. We found biofilms. You see the biofilms here, and you see the pleomorphic forms there. So the challenge is how to destroy these intracellular and these round bodies or pleomorphic forms, whatever you name it, and how to destroy the biofilm. Or maybe we need a biofilm in the communication. Some doctors, they say, Jenna, we talked yesterday about that very interestingly. You said maybe we need the biofilms. Maybe we live with them. We have a lot of biofilms. Chlamydia makes biofilms. E. coli makes biofilms. We have a lot of slime, polymucosaccharides. But what are the challenges for diagnostic tests? And this was answered by Professor Gilbert. She developed the new TICPLEX basic test, and this is the first ELISA worldwide against round body antibodies, or name it pleomorphic form antibodies. We found in the HiLicense project in the European Union, we got €4 million foundation. 8 years ago with this HiLicense 1 project, I was involved with Professor Gilbert and some other universities. We found really these round body antibodies. So Professor Gilbert said, why not to develop an ELISA against round body antibodies? That makes sense in chronic Lyme. And we find them now. The paper will come PubMed listed the next 2 weeks before ALCE conference. You will see it. The next challenge, you heard a lot about that by Carmen. Carmen, thank you that you also mentioned the TH1 system, the CD57 cells. We came together by that, and the ELISpot testings. What about the CD57 plus lymphocytes? I think the CD38 are also a good marker, but why should we not combine both of them? Why should we not look at both? Because the CD57 cells, they are not high specific for Lyme disease, what we know. They are low in chronic bacterial infection, not in virus infection. In virus infection, you find low CD3 cells, CD4 cells, for example. But they are not highly specific. Although the paper in 2001 from Professor Ray Stricker, he said, yes, it's in every Lyme patient, it's low, CD57 cells. And it was in the guidelines of ILADS. Boroscano did a lot of work on it, and Horowitz also. Now it was removed because it's not so specific. We find it also low in chlamydia infections, mycoplasma infections, Bartonella infections, but nevertheless, it's a good marker for chronic bacterial infection. The reference ranges were done by Professor Kenny Melley. He did it in autistic children, and he found in autistic children low CD57 cells, all lower than 130 per microliter. And this is also my experience in chronic Lyme patients. So that can mean that this marker is also helpful in autistic children. Why not? That was a big multi-center study done with the Italian group too. The ELISpot. ELISpot, what does it mean? ELISpot is also an ELISA. In the end, don't be worried, but an ELISA for the T lymphocytes. We look at the lymphocytic system, at the Th1 system, because we know that in every infection we have Th1 and Th2 immune reactions. The ELISpot is up to 100-fold more sensitive than the antibody testings. That's a general rule. We use this test in transplantation medicine. It's very, very sensitive. I think in Spain you have some centers for transplantation medicine using the ELISpot. And what I show you here is a positive example. We have 3 different antigens. I come later to that. But I think, why should we not look at the Th1 immune reactions? Why did we forget this? I don't understand that myself. I was critical about that test. But the antibody, the titer, is also not helpful to decide if an antibiotic therapy is successful or not. You cannot decide. Antibody IgG you have maybe for years. IgA is a little different. IgM can be or can vanish. We have also the point of polyclonal stimulation of IgM, IgA, IgG. So we have to be careful to say this is a specific IgM antibody against Borrelia burgdorferi. And we have the cross reactions. IgM for Borrelia cross reacts with Epstein-Barr virus, parvovirus B19, cytomegalovirus, herpes simplex virus. So I have a lot of cross reactions with that. It's not high specific, the IgM for Borrelia. You cannot say, now I have IgM, I haven't persistent. That's correct from our medical understanding laboratory medicine. The ELISpot is also helpful because, why? What is the reason? The lymphocytes is a lymphocyte-based test, and the lymphocytes survive 6, maximum up to 8 weeks in the peripheral bloodstream. So you can say if 2 months after a successful therapy, the ELISpot is still elevated, that means it's still an ongoing infection that time. But it cannot reflect the day when you take the blood. It reflects always, when you take the blood today, the last 6 to 8 weeks of a current infection. So it's difficult, it's no PCR where you take the blood today and you can say, this day I have exactly this pathogen in my bloodstream. Borrelia is not so very common in the bloodstream, but we come later to that. The ELISpot belongs to the interferon gamma release assays, and it was approved for tuberculosis in 2011. It's an IGRA test. The ELISA is a variation. It's a very fast test. You can get the results within 24, maximum 48 hours. It's a standardized test. It's a 96-well test. So it's good available. It's good standardized test. It's really good, but you need a manual experience. It's not a machine doing that. You need a good team members, good education of that to do that. There came a book, in America they had these iSpot testings. It's no longer available, but they did a similar interferon gamma release, and they said the sensitivity is around 84%. We come very close to Carmen, what you showed before with 85%, and the specificity is 94%. Now you're disappointed, you say, oh wow, I expect a test system 100%. You will never find a test system in the world, in the whole laboratory medicine, 100%. No, but 80% is, or over 80% is good sensitivity, believe me. Over, what do you think, creatinine? Creatinine with your kidney. It has just 50% sensitivity. And we do it in laboratory medicine, 50%. So 50% have kidney failures and no elevated creatinine. So we calculate the glomerular filtration rate, whatever we do. In this book, they also said it's a robust test system, it's highly reproducible data, and every time I hear we need better test systems, we have good test systems, why don't we use their test systems? That's the question. We use it in tuberculosis. It's a gold standard. The quantiferon test. Every doctor is doing that. Why not for Lyme disease? Why not for other infections? We have good test systems. Laboratory is a modern laboratory. Maybe later on we have biochips, whatever. But this test system is in this time window a good test system. Everybody says we need better, better, better. I cannot hear that any longer. In America also we have good tests, but America is not doing the test. The CDC doesn't allow chronic Lyme, and therefore they don't do the test. You know, this is a political problem. That's not the problem of laboratory medicine. These two test systems, ELISpot and CD57 cells, they complement each other in the quest to understand T-cell mediated immunity in vivo. So to bring all the data together, we have around 94% specificity, not 100%. Again, not say I need a test system 100%, you will never reach that. Also PCR will fail, contamination, inhibition, whatever, you will never reach by PCR 100%. Also the HIV test is not 100%. Believe me, that's laboratory medicine. You have to understand that. 84% sensitivity, which is good data. I come to other data. What about the antigens? We should check for all most common antigens in the world. That's sensu stricto. We do the full antigen. We need also the Guarini I, we need the Afzeli I, and we need the sensu stricto again. We have this peptide mix, and interestingly, Kenny Mallet is sending some chronic fatigue patients to my laboratory, and interestingly, they all have elevated peptide mix. Why? Because in the peptide mix, we have the Guarini I, and in the full antigen not. That's a difference. So in neuroborreliosis, you will find many of the Guarini I elevated ELISpots, but not for the full antigen. This is more with a joint arthritis. But in most cases, you have combination. The ticks are dirty needles. Ticks are full of so many pathogens. You cannot imagine. We don't know all of them. The Neo-Alicia is just maybe one of that. We have so many in this. The LFA1, this is important for rheumatologists. 1 week ago, I went to Moscow. I was in front of 100 rheumatologists in Russia. They are very interested in doing projects now, rheumatoid arthritis and maybe Lyme disease. Maybe these rheumatoid arthritis patients have Lyme disease. And the LFA1 is very important. It shows the lymphocyte function antigen 1, which is a shared epitope. And we know that Borrelia can induce by mimicry effects. It's an epitope, OSPA, similar to LFA1 in some of Borrelia subspecies, which can do this LFA1, and then you develop autoimmune disorders. And maybe it's reversible, maybe it's not reversible. We have children developing that. Please, if LFA1 is positive, do the ANA, anti-nuclear antibodies, do the CCP antibodies, the modern rheumatoid factor, and the ANCA vasculitis. We find also a lot of vasculitis in these patients. This is the slide exactly from Professor Jack Lambert, Carmen. This is your slide, exactly documenting 85% in his Irish patients. He found, like you, 85% in the ELISpot, and in the two-tier system, I think it's around 20% or 15%. So forget the antibodies. Forget it. Simply forget it. Maybe you do screening with it, with the Western or with the Sierra spot or whatever, or with the maybe Tick-Plex basic for round bodies, you found more. But the antibodies cannot tell you how active an infection is. So this is not my data. This is from an independent professor. So you see the overlapping of the sensitivity. That's really interesting to find out what is the percentage. 85 is good data for a test system. These are all now the ELISpots. I heard today we cannot test for Miyamoto. Yes, we can test for Miyamoto. We have a 99.9% specific antigen for the ELISpot. So we can check for Miyamoto. Why not check for Miyamoto? It's not the main problem, I can say to you, but we have some patients with Miyamoto with feverish reactions. It makes some relapsing fever in this direction, but not so many. The question is, could it be chronic or not? That's a question always. Can it be chronic or not, or is it also a stimulation of the lymphocytes? What is very helpful, in my opinion, is the Bartonella-Hensele ELISpot. It's 200-fold more sensitive than the antibodies again, and the Babesia microti. This is in Europe the main problem. We find more, the more we look at the Th1 system, not at the antibodies. We have it also for mycoplasma, we have it for chlamydia. I do a lot for viruses. Viruses are next challenge I come to in the second part. Candida, we have it now for Candida and Aspergillus. To say one word, not every patient has Lyme disease. And you have to find it out by laboratory testings. You need helpful tools because the symptoms are difficult to say, now I have a chronic fatigue, what is it? Maybe it's Lyme disease, maybe it's chlamydia, maybe it's herpes, maybe it's Epstein-Barr virus, whatever, or a multiple infection. This is an overview about all test systems we have in the world available, also PCR. I don't think the PCR in bloodstream makes a big sense. We have inhibiting factors, the volume is not enough. Borrelia doesn't like so really much the bloodstream. It's in the tissue. What we need are biopsies from tissue, from the gut, from the brain, from the nerve. We need biopsies, 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 and then we look by multiplex PCR, that's a broad range PCR for different pathogens, and then you know what is in this tissue. The key is the tissue. These are all pathogens, they don't like the bloodstream so very much. And also to mention, some patients with no bullseye rashes, they have summer flu, a summer flu. Summer flu can be, without bullseye rash, a typical sign for stage 1, for the current infection. But no doctor is asking after a summer flu for a tick bite. And then you don't remember a tick bite. So you don't remember. So that means in a summer flu, all of us, we should do a Borrelia, maybe a Western blot. Maybe it's Borrelia infection. You don't know. You don't know. 20%, it's around the percentage. This is now my proposal, how to solve that problem. What I do is a Tickplex Basic. It's a cheap test, IgG, IgM. It's around €60. You have also the whole spirochete in it. I do the ELISpot and CD57 cells. Then you have the complete information, and I think we reach around 99% of all chronic infected patients by these three. Sorry, one sentence to monitoring. This is the main mistake. I heard 2 weeks doxycycline is okay, or 3 weeks. But do you monitor the patient afterwards? No. You send them home, you give them 3 weeks doxycycline, and they say, oh, it's fine. We have these persistiforms. Why should we not monitor this patient? We name it a staging process. Patient come back, and patient, if you get some other strange symptoms, please come early back into my clinic. Don't leave the patient alone. It's not so easy to treat. Doxycycline is a very easy antibiotic, and you know about dapsone they try now, daptomycin, very hard drugs, lepra medicine, which are very hard. Co-infections. I don't like the word co-infection. Maybe we change today the word co-infection. Co-infection, it sounds like you have a little domestic beneath you. Why should not be the co-infection the main infection? Borrelia is a co-infection. Who knows or who says Borrelia is the main infection? Nobody can tell you. Then you have to culture it, you have to isolate it, you have to look at the load of it, the bacterial load. You cannot do that. I see the tendency by the ELISpots and the IgA and the antibodies that Borrelia is not in most cases the main infection. It's a co-infection, or it's not Lyme disease, simply no Lyme disease, or you treated Lyme disease successfully and otherwise you have the next problem. Who knows, opportunistic viruses. These are all the co-infections, or other infection, name it other infections, or opportunistic or whatever, but don't name it so simply co-infection. What's a co-infection? It's no nice word. Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, chlamydia was found in ticks, also Rickettsia, Coxiella, Mycoplasma, the viruses play a role. Also Coxsackie virus was found in ticks. Maybe it is a tick-borne illness, we don't know. In Texas, cases in the 90s were described. Bartonella, these are the symptoms. I'm a medical doctor. I worked in infectious diseases. I like symptomatology. Also, I worked in cancer with all the chemotherapies, the grading and staging. I like this. I like symptomatology. But now we come to the point. How to educate your doctors or the students to all of these symptoms. It's really not easy. The students have to learn a lot, and the students are educated symptomatically. Chronic infections don't exist at universities. They don't exist. Maybe you have tuberculosis, or chronic hepatitis B, but chronic Bartonellosis, it doesn't exist. Chronic rickettsiosis, no. Chronic babesiosis, malaria-like, this exists. I don't go through it, but one point, the cats, we heard it, are really dangerous animals because they're contaminated. Cat scratch disease, swollen lymph nodes, and the ticks on the cats. The ticks suck the blood from the from the cat, and then they transmit all of the pathogens into your body. The complications, you can die by that. Endocarditis, etc. It's also dangerous illness. But Bartonellosis, don't underestimate. The ticks are full, and they are all intracellular. Also to say all of these other infections are all intracellular, not extracellular. You can be happy to suffer from Lyme disease because this is also extracellular. All others are intracellular. What does that mean? Ceftriaxone doesn't work because it's extracellular working, okay? Not in all of these co-infections or other infections. This is where very often the dermatologist and the GP, they don't look at that. The patients live 20, 30 years with active Bartonellosis. You can do biopsies, send it here to Tanya, to Red Labs. She's doing that with the biopsies, and then you can check for Bartonella. And if you find you have proven the illness, it doesn't hurt, you can live with it. But these patients have all other symptoms, fatigue, whatever, cognitive problems, psychiatric problems, or they are in psychiatric hospitals. This is the testing panel we can do actually for the antibodies are not so satisfying. You can do the PCR, you can try it in blood, the biopsy, or the VEGF, you talk about the vasculitis factor. Babesia, it's malaria-like. I just can go through it. The time is not here to talk about all of the symptoms. It's malaria-like, intracellular, not so easy. We have a fish technique, we have PCR, we can do ELISpot, and also blood transfusion. This is really dangerous if you get a blood transfusion because it's malaria-like. If you're immune suppressed, you can die by that. And in America, Jenna, I asked you yesterday evening, you check some of your patients for Babesia in the blood transfusions, correct? Yes. Yes. So it's malaria-like, you can die by that, sure. And the dogs can die. For the veterinarians, no more than the humans. If you talk with a veterinarian doctor, they say, yes, Babesia is life-threatening for the dog, but if you talk with a human doctor, never heard about that. Chronic doesn't exist, chronic doesn't exist, chronic never exists. It's easy to treat, everything's easy to treat in this. Oh, maybe I have Salmonella, Yersinia can be difficult to treat. Tuberculosis, we have tuberculosis, that's dangerous. HIV, horrible. H. pylori, also difficult to treat now, genetic variation. But on the other hand, these are all can also get chronic. Why should they get not chronic? Why? What's the reason? How do you do the definition? And all the research institutes in Germany, where I come from, they all look at the acute, not for chronic. They all say chronic doesn't exist. They all say. And the teaching books, they say chronic doesn't exist. Nobody checked for that, nobody. No staging, no monitoring. This is our challenge for the scientists in Spain, wherever you go. This is how we can test it a little. We have the IgG, IgM antibodies, no IgA. Chlamydia pneumoniae is my favorite. I could talk 1 hour about chlamydia pneumoniae. Chlamydia pneumoniae, it does the same symptoms like you have Lyme disease, exactly the same. And it makes cystic, it makes pleomorphic, it makes aberrant forms, it's resistant, it makes biofilms, it's the same. It's exactly the same. And you will find 80% of patients with Lyme with active chlamydia, pneumonia, not the sexual transmission. Some say, oh, I have a sexual problem. Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, depression, fibromyalgia, ME, CFS, heart attacks, ischemic strokes, atherosclerosis, autism, Parkinsonism, rheumatoid, etc. So this is Lyme disease. No, it's chlamydosis. Chlamydosis, it's a little different. Huh? We have to check for that. Why not? And we have a perfect IgA test. I just can recommend that. IgA, it was found also in a study, 60.8% chlamydia pneumoniae in adults with ischemic strokes, apoplectic strokes, arteritis. That's the key for that. And the ELISpot. Then you find it out if it's active or not. Mycoplasma, the same. Mycoplasma is the same like chlamydia, the same. It's exactly the same. Biofilms, it's no big difference. But you should find it out. And then you need laboratories. So this is our advantage. You can do an IgA testings, and you can do an ELISpot for that. You can try to isolate in the sputum. That's not so easy in the lavage, what we tried. The viruses, we don't have enough time. I like the viruses. I do now teachings about viruses and cancer, viruses and autoimmune disorders. Also, some other of these other infections, Yersinia infections, autoimmune disorders. That's a huge field to care for that in the future. The problem is Epstein-Barr virus makes a lot of these Lyme symptoms. Chronic fatigue, you name it, opportunistic infection or whatever. Maybe it's later on your main infection. It's not Lyme disease, it's EBV. And you come and you do that job, you find that out, is it active or not? That's the job. It makes cancer, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, very dangerous. There came a big study showing exactly in 2017 about Epstein-Barr virus. So if you are interested in the Lyme disease field, please don't forget the other infections. Don't be enthusiastic. Now you say everybody has Lyme. I was the same. 12 years ago I said everybody has Lyme disease, the hype, everybody. But be careful in the differentiation, please. You can do important mistakes, also therapies, because you cannot treat a virus with antibiotics. I never have heard about that, never. The ELISpot is the key for the lytic antigen. The lytic antigen tells you exactly how active it is. Is it replicating or not? That's a perfect test system. And they have so high spots, I cannot imagine that. The cytomegalovirus, it's similar. It belongs to the herpes virus group. These are all the associations. You can check it by the ELISpot. We don't have an IgA. I would favorize an IgA test for that, because in the local inflammation, it's more helpful than all of these IgMs. IgMs is for hospital. For you, it's important to find out in clinics IgM. But in Germany, we do also in clinics IgA more and more. If you have good IgA testings for cytomegalovirus or varicella zoster or herpes zoster, we prefer the IgA because it's a systemic marker also and localized inflammation marker. Herpes simplex virus, also neuroviral land. It's associated with multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis can be also Lyme disease for sure. And all of these are immune triggered. We heard a lot about immune system. I think it's really important. Here we have a good IgA test for herpes simplex virus, and we can do the ELISpot. Important is to know the IgA antibodies have a half-life time of just 2 weeks. The varicella zoster virus, just to go to that. There was a study with 23,000 patients and with herpes zoster, and from these, 35% got an apoplectic stroke and 59% a heart attack, just to let you know about that, problematic in the world. How to check it? IgA, varicella zoster ELISpot. Coxsackie virus, the time is not there to go to the enterovirus. I am now more focused on enteroviruses. Coxsackie A7B1, it's very important. It makes Lyme symptoms, and it makes the colitis, the gut issues. We have to check that. Mitochondriopathies, they all do that. Nagalase and all of this, what you have heard today. So Coxsackie will play a very important role also in juvenile diabetes in the future. We have the echovirus now checking for IgA. Just to say, multiple symptoms, multiple infections, yes. There's not one patient I see with just Lyme disease. Doesn't exist. Multiple infections. Some patients have 8, 10 infections in the same body active. The question is, what is the dominant infection? What is the secondary dominant infection? And then you have to read the laboratory report. That's important. That's the last slide to show you a little evidence base that we heard about, that 20 up to 30% of autistic disorders can be Lyme disease and mycoplasma. Multiple sclerosis was in 1992 described in Lyme disease, the big imitator, also the dementia, don't forget the Alzheimer's patients, the depression, schizophrenia, anorexia. Interestingly, there came also a study some years ago about Alzheimer's disease and Lyme disease, the association with that. But all of these studies, they didn't look for multiple infections. They just looked for Lyme disease. Or maybe for Garth Nicholson looked for HHV 6 and 7 and 8, but not for EBV, not for CMV. Something is missing, not for enteroviruses, not for parasites. But it's also expensive. Don't forget that. Every study we do, the more we look, the more we find, but it's expensive for all of us, and we need scientific money for science. Thank you very much for your attention.